My grandmother died years after that visit we made to her. It was a pretty strong and difficult episode for everyone. The whole family went to Guadalajara. I saw uncles I hadn't seen in years, cousins I haven't seen since. Raúl, my cousin, and his mother were the closest people to my grandmother. We knew they would stay at the house for a while, perhaps a few years, until it was decided whether to remodel it or finally sell it. It should be clarified that this aunt was not my grandmother's daughter, but her daughter-in-law. Her husband, my uncle Nestor, the eldest son, died in an accident when my cousin was about 5 years old. None of the children intended to stay living in the house. My sister and I have always felt more comfortable with the family of my late uncle Nestor than with the others. I asked permission to stay with them the days we were there. At night, staying up very late talking, I think I felt closer to my grandmother than ever, and all through the words of my uncle and my cousin. In the last months of my grandmother's life, they had also drifted a little apart. Her passion for reading and, above all, for the supernatural was always known to everyone. My grandmother was Catholic, but that did not stop her from knowing about these phenomena, about mythology, legends, and other cultures. The children in the family always mentioned encounters with these beings at my grandmother's house, but the adults never took it seriously. My aunt suggests that maybe something happened in that house when my uncles were little and lived there. To this day, none of them go inside alone. Grandma was perhaps not very open about it with others, but she did not hide that there was something strange there. They saw her in the yard, apparently alone, carrying sweet things hidden in dark corners of the garden at night. It is curious, perhaps a detail without importance, but we found 2 photos of my grandmother as a girl, perhaps from a birthday party, and they were in that same yard. A yard that seems frozen in time, unlike the street outside the huge walls, which has changed completely. In those photos, taken in the corner of the yard, my grandmother appears with other children. The funny thing is that she is smiling and happy, while the other children have serious, almost macabre faces. That's only in those 2 pictures in the garden. Inside the house we found more photos where all the children look happy, like at any party. My cousin was more honest when he talked about things my grandmother told him, when his mother was not nearby. What my grandmother told him was so strange that even my aunt could hardly accept it. She told him about her garden friends, as she called them. They accompanied her throughout childhood and part of her youth, although she had forgotten them. When she was a girl, she had names for everyone. She grew up and lived a while in Morelia when she married my grandfather, but eventually returned home when her parents died. Somehow she had forgotten these friends, but they returned when my uncle Nestor was born. My grandmother thought they returned to be friends with my uncle, my father, and his brothers, the children who lived in that house then. None of those children accepted the friendship, as far as we know, and eventually the beings stopped appearing, or at least stopped being seen. Sometimes sounds like listening to each other, snoring at night, like seeing things in the yard. Many years later, when my grandmother was already an old woman, it is assumed that one of them returned, perhaps the one who entered our room. However, there was never a serious incident. None of my cousins suffered anything traumatic. Then, approximately a year before her death, one afternoon my cousin helped my grandmother with her roses and they worked in the garden until almost night. Suddenly my grandmother told him to stay quiet for a moment and asked him not to turn around. My cousin complied, surprised. They went back into the house a few minutes later and my grandmother told him that the garden had been filled with them, more than those they had never seen, but this time they had a threatening, terrifying appearance. My grandmother seemed scared and my cousin told his mother. She thought the prudent thing would be to tell my uncles, the children of the grandmother, and they decided to attribute it to senile dementia. They tried to convince my grandmother to enter an old age home. She bothered everyone, even my cousin, for having told the story. Although I no longer saw them the same way, my aunt and cousin visited her at least once a month to see how she was. On one of those last visits before she died, As they were about to enter the house, they heard a rumble, as if there were a meeting inside. Things moving, voices. When they opened the door, there was only silence. The lights were off, and my grandmother was alone in her room, calm, as they found her every visit, and as they found her the day she died. They found her with garden flowers in her hair, according to the forensics. She had died the night before, but my aunt swore the flowers looked as if they'd just been cut. My cousin showed me a letter my grandmother left him. She thanked him for all the care he had always given, for being the closest to her, for being a companion who cared more than any of her children. The letter ends with this phrase: "You have to know, Raúl, that some are bad." The phrase does not seem to relate to the rest of the letter, and my cousin cannot be sure what it refers to, but he thinks she was not speaking of her children. I once tried to talk about this with my father, to know more, perhaps to ask about his childhood in that house, but he only said that grandma was bad. And that's what everyone does, attribute everything to her age, to her passion for fantasy. I know, at least, that there was nothing fanciful about what I heard in that house or about the marks I found on the windows.